Hey friends, tonight, let's explore why medieval pigs, yes, snorting, mud-loving pigs, sometimes ended up in shackles. Imagine that, you wrapped in a blanket drifting to sleep. And somewhere in your mind, a pig is being marched into court like a character from Law and Order Swine Unit. You might think this is fiction, but no, this actually happened. And no, you're not dreaming yet. So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And let me know in the comments where and when you're listening. From always love hearing how far our sleepy little stories travel. Now dim, the lights maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Falaise, Normandy. It's 1386. The market smells like hay leather and cheese left out too long. People aren't bustling around today. They're gathered, standing, murmuring, children on shoulders, bakers leaning out their windows, because in the center of the square, a pig is being arrested. Yes, arrested. It's a female pig, a sow, accused of a brutal crime. According to the town crier, a man whose job strangely enough includes yelling at pigs, she attacked a child. The boy, barely 3, had wandered too close. The sow reacted, and the outcome was tragic. Or at least that's what people say. The specifics are muddled, as stories in small towns often are. Now here's where things stop making sense. Or maybe start making too much sense. If you're medieval, the pig was taken into custody, literally chained by the foreleg. She was placed in a cell, fed, guarded, treated like a suspect awaiting trial, not butchered, not destroyed immediately, but processed. You're watching a constable adjust her ropes while someone is scribbling notes. Welcome to 14th century justice. This wasn't an isolated case. Across medieval Europe, particularly in France, Switzerland, and parts of Italy, animals were frequently put on trial. Pigs were the most common defendants, probably because, well, they lived close to humans, roamed freely, and occasionally, just occasionally, got a bit too close. Chickens were rarely arrested. Cats, despite their shifty expressions, escaped prosecution. But pigs repeat offenders, apparently. The sow in front of you is silent. She looks unimpressed, as if she's been through worse. The crowd, however, is enthralled. This isn't just punishment, it's performance. A morality tale dressed in hooves and dirt. A judge is present. Yes, an actual magistrate. He wears a hat shaped like a meringue and looks deeply serious. In fact, he has a clerk beside him, recording each development with great care. Why? Because the law says so. According to custom, any creature capable of doing harm to a human must be subject to legal process. Whether it understands that or not is apparently beside the point. And here comes the detail that really ties it all together. Like a ribbon on a roast, the pig has a lawyer. Not a pig lawyer, a human representing the pig. A defense attorney whose actual job is to make legal arguments on behalf of the sow. His opening line includes the phrase, "The accused lacks the capacity for malice." You almost want to applaud or sigh. Now pause here. Let's step out of the square, just briefly. You lean against a wall that smells faintly of old onions and chalk. Your brain, fogged by drowsiness and disbelief, is trying to compute. Was this really necessary? Surely a pig can't form intent. That's a basic principle of crime, right, mens rea, the guilty mind. And yet here she is accused of murder in the first degree. This is where the historical debate simmers. Some scholars argue that animal trials were a theatrical extension of religious ideas, a way to frame disorder in a moral world. The pig becomes sin, incarnate devourer of innocence, deserving of judgment. Others say it was simply a legal formality, a kind of bureaucratic reflex to soothe communities and affirm order. Kill the pig without a trial, and people protest. But give it a ceremony, a judge, a sentence, a rope, and suddenly the world feels stable again. Back in the square, the mood turns somber. Witnesses are called. One woman swears the sow had been aggressive for weeks. Another claims to have seen it studying the child. A man in a wool cap says it looked like it meant to do it. You try not to laugh or cry. And the pig. She just stands there, occasionally shifting her weight, occasionally snorting, as if bored by the entire charade. If pigs could roll their eyes, she'd be rolling them hard. Eventually, the judge delivers the verdict guilty. The sentence is execution by hanging. A date is set. It will be a public event, of course. Processions, church bells, maybe a meat pie stand or two, but no bacon from this pig. That would be unholy. As the crowd disperses, you walk slowly away, the cobblestones uneven beneath your feet. You hear someone mutter, "She got what she deserved," followed by another voice whispering, "Poor creature didn't even squeal." And somewhere between the absurdity and the tragedy, sleep starts to find you. 3 soft jokes before you drift off. That pig probably got a fairer trial than most peasants. Imagine being a medieval defense lawyer and your client eats your notes. The only hung jury in this trial was, well, never mind. You're too sleepy for wordplay now. Snouts in the courtroom. The next day, you return to the same square, not because you were summoned, but because you're curious. And maybe you've started to care about how pigs get legal representation in a system built for humans wearing shoes. It's oddly comforting in a way, that even in a world of dirt roads and dried turnips, people still believe in procedure, even for pigs. This time, though, the trial isn't outside. You're inside a dim wood-paneled courtroom, probably used for land disputes or goat theft on slow days. It smells faintly of beeswax, wet fur, and too many people trying not to cough. The sow is here again. She's in the defendant's box, which has clearly been modified to prevent escape or chewing. She's shackled to a low wooden post. Someone tried to sweep the floor beforehand, but there's still straw. The room is quiet, save for the occasional hoof scrape and the slow scribble of the court clerk, who seems to be developing a deep, possibly unnecessary, emotional investment in this case. Now let's talk about the structure, because that's where things get surreal. The prosecution stands up first. He's dressed in faded robes, and his beard is the kind that suggests he hasn't tasted joy since the last solar eclipse. He begins with a declaration of the pig's guilt, citing not just eyewitness accounts, but also passages from both canon and civil law. He compares the pig to the serpent in Eden. He uses the phrase devourer of innocence twice, which feels a bit dramatic even by medieval standards. Then it's the defense's turn. You weren't expecting much, honestly. How do you defend a pig in court? But this lawyer, let's call him Etienne. He's prepared. Etienne has notes, references, and what appears to be a small book titled On the Rational Capacity of Swine. He argues quite convincingly that animals act on instinct, not malice, that the pig had no motive, no understanding of the consequence, and certainly no grasp of property law. Then he drops the real gem. Can we truly claim that a creature incapable of baptism is capable of moral guilt? Silence follows. Someone in the gallery drops a spoon. A rooster outside crows perhaps in approval. You glance around and notice that the crowd isn't just locals. There are people from neighboring towns, some scribes, a monk, even a merchant chewing on a fig who probably just came for the drama. You meanwhile are trying to stay still in the back row, marveling at how everyone seems to accept that this process is entirely normal. But here's where things get weirder. The courtroom treats this pig like a person. She has the right to silence, which, to be fair, she's already mastered. She's present at every hearing. Her lawyer can call witnesses. In some cases, not this one, thankfully courts have even gone as far as to delay hearings if the animal was too unwell to appear. One might ask, why not just deal with this quietly? Why go through the formality, the parchment, the wigs? Yes, even small ones for pigs, in rare cases, the time. The answer, historically speaking, might be fear. See, pigs weren't just livestock. In the Middle Ages, pigs roamed towns freely. They weren't pen-fenced or always watched. They ate refuse-fought dogs, sometimes wandered into churches, yes, really, and occasionally injured people. In a world where survival was a daily chore, pigs were both essential and terrifying. To try them was to contain the chaos they represented. Academic debate still circles around this. Was it symbolic justice, a moral play to reinforce communal norms? Or was it just a legal loophole plugged with pig's feet? Some argue that trials like this blurred the line between sacred and profane. The courtroom became a stage for existential reassurance that even nature could be held accountable, that the world, messy as it was, had rules even if those rules involved lawyers sweating profusely in front of livestock. Back to the trial. The final witness is a shepherd who claims to have seen the pig behaving unnaturally near the edge of town. When pressed, he admits that it looked like it knew something. A few heads nod solemnly, which might say more about medieval psychology than the pig's intellect. The judge calls for a brief recess. You step outside, letting the cool air brush past your face. You hear the murmurs of townsfolk dissecting the trial like it's opening night at the theater. A small boy asks if the pig will get to appeal. His mother answers, "Only if it starts talking." When you return, the mood has shifted. The clerk clears his throat. The judge, in his most solemn voice, announces the next session will involve physical inspection of the accused. You're not sure what that means, but you decide maybe it's time to find a snack. Before you go, Etienne leans over the pig and whispers something that sounds suspiciously like legal advice. The pig snorts. Maybe it's just indigestion. Maybe it's acknowledgement. Either way, you leave the courtroom with more questions than answers. 3 gentle jokes before the lights fade. This courtroom had more swine than a royal feast, just fewer table manners. Etienne now ranks as the only person in history to bill a pig for legal counsel. If the pig wins the case, she's technically allowed to countersue for emotional distress. Bacon never looked so powerful when animals wore clothes to trial. You arrive early, this time drawn by a rumor, an odd, wrinkled rumor that the accused would be dressed. Not metaphorically, literally. a robe, possibly shoes, definitely a hat. At first you think it's a joke. Someone in the bakery queue might have been pulling your leg. But here you are standing in the side corridor of a town hall that smells like mildew and old ink watching as two men gently try to coax a pig into what appears to be a child-sized tunic. It's a pale linen smock, frilly at the neck, mended at the shoulder. Not exactly haute couture, but dignified in a way that says, yes, I am aware I am being tried for murder, and I dressed accordingly. The pig, to her credit, accepts the process with a grunt and a blink, which is probably more grace than most of us could manage. And yes, the outfit is required, because today's trial involves not just a serious charge, but a symbolic judgment. Some towns believed that in order to hold animals accountable, they had to appear in a condition similar to humans. That meant dressing them, sometimes for modesty, sometimes to reflect the seriousness of court, sometimes, most unsettlingly, to prepare them for execution in proper dignity. You're witnessing the peculiar marriage of justice and theater. The pig is led into the courtroom like a small noble at a very disappointing ball. Her hooves clack against the stone floor. The hem of her robe drags slightly. Someone has tied a blue ribbon around her tail. You try not to laugh, but the absurdity is bubbling in your chest. But for the townspeople, this is completely normal, expected even. You hear a woman whisper, "That's the same robe they used on the goat who trampled the bishop's dais." Now comes the testimony. The prosecutor stands. He clears his throat. Today, he's leaning into the metaphor. He accuses the pig not only of violence, but of moral corruption. He argues that the pig's actions were without cause or conscience. The pig, silent and radiant in her linen shift, continues to blink slowly. Then the defense stands. Etienne is back, and today he's wearing a pin shaped like a scallop shell. You suspect it's meant to make him look learned. He begins not with legal jargon, but with a parable, something about St. Anthony and the humility of livestock. He then gestures dramatically to the pig's attire. Does this look like a creature of evil? No, Your Honor. It looks like an unwilling participant in a human morality play. The judge furrows his brow. He may not disagree, but the show must go on. Now here comes the detail that historians still argue over. Did medieval people genuinely believe animals had moral agency, or were they projecting, using these trials as a way to process grief, fear, or guilt? Some scholars point out that the trials mirrored human justice, not because pigs were seen as people, but because people didn't want to admit their own systems were arbitrary. If a pig could be tried like a man, then maybe the laws were universal, cosmic, holy. Of course not everyone bought into the drama. Some chroniclers, usually monks with strong opinions and even stronger ink stains, criticize the practice as a distraction. Better to clothe the soul in virtue, one wrote, than dress a pig for penance. But not everyone agreed. In some towns, the dressing of animals was taken so seriously that tailors were paid. Records survive. 2 souls paid for the pig's robe, 1 soul for dye, 1 half soul for the tailor's beer. And yes, even in the Middle Ages, tailors needed a drink after sewing a tunic for a pig. You lean against the courtroom wall, eyes half-lidded now. The voices begin to fade into a warm, soft murmur. The courtroom is quiet, save for the occasional snort or sniffle. The judge asks if the pig has anything to say. The clerk records dutifully that she remains silent, but not defiant. She is sentenced to execution in 3 days' time. The robe will be kept on during the procession for the sake of dignity. The crowd exits slowly, murmuring about what kind of music will be played at the event. You follow behind the scent of wool and straw, drifting around you like fog. Outside, Etienne catches your eye and shrugs. "At least she looked good," he says. 3 very sleepy jokes before you fade. Somewhere, there's a pig who went to trial and came out with better fashion sense than you. The tailors' union still doesn't recognize livestock robes as billable work. If justice is blind, medieval justice was also slightly nearsighted and really into costumes. Swine justice or superstition. You wake up, or maybe you never really slept and find yourself in the town archive. The room is dim lit by a single flickering candle that smells vaguely of goat tallow and resignation. Around you are scrolls, records, inkpots, and dust. So much dust. It feels like it has opinions. But you're here because something isn't sitting right. Justice is justice, right? Rules, evidence, judgment. Yet you've just watched a pig get sentenced to death while wearing a tunic. And you've started to wonder, was this ever really about the pig? Tonight, you're tracing the line between law and superstition, between the logical and the symbolic, between punishment and pageant. Let's start with the basics. Medieval people weren't idiots. They knew pigs weren't signing contracts or plotting revenge behind hay bales. But the boundaries between human behavior and the natural world were blurrier than you'd think. Animals weren't just creatures, they were seen as part of a divine order. When one broke that order bit, a child devoured a loaf, trampled a saint's altar, it was seen not just as chaos, but as a sign. In other words, pigs weren't punished because they were guilty. They were punished because people needed to believe that someone could be. You reach for a parchment, crispy crinkled and curling at the edges. It documents a pig trial from 1457. The language is formal, almost regal. The sow did willfully and maliciously cause the death of, and so on. But in the margins, there's a scribble from the clerk. The child's soul was believed to be taken by demons. The sow's attack confirmed it. Ah, there it is. Superstition sneaking in through the back door wearing legal robes. And that's not unusual. The farther you go into these records, the more blurred the lines become. In some cases, pigs were excommunicated before being sentenced. Excommunicated, as if depriving them of access to the Eucharist was somehow an essential part of the process. You try to imagine a sow being denied communion and sigh deeply into your sleeve. This is where it gets even stranger. Entire towns believed that failing to punish a pig might bring divine wrath. Crops could fail. Livestock could vanish. Plagues could return. Executing a pig wasn't just about that one pig. It was about restoring order to the cosmos. And it worked, at least in their minds. Academic historians still debate this. Some claim these trials were vestiges of older pagan traditions, ritual sacrifices rebranded as legal process. Others argue they were deliberate performances, state-sponsored morality plays to affirm the power of the law and the church. A few modern scholars suggest they were cathartic. A community traumatized by loss or grief needed closure, and pigs were convenient scapegoats with hooves. You shuffle a few scrolls and find one curious case, a trial held during a solar eclipse. The pig had killed a chicken. The villagers believed it had absorbed evil light during the eclipse and must be destroyed to preserve balance. The court agreed. The pig was executed at dawn when the sun returned. And yet right next to that record is another a case where a pig was pardoned. The child had provoked it, they said. The animal acted in natural defense. You can't help but feel proud of that courtroom, even across 6 centuries. Finally, a little nuance. It's worth noting that some of these trials were held with great solemnity. Priests led prayers before proceedings. Judges fasted. Bells were rung. When you punish a pig, but surround the act with sacred ritual, you're not just executing an animal. You're enacting a symbolic repair of the moral universe. And maybe also trying to sleep better at night. You lean back against a shelf. A small spider dangles above your head, entirely uninterested in jurisprudence. You think about how much effort went into these trials, how much energy, belief, and parchment was spent on pigs. And then you realize it was never about the pigs. It was about the people. The need to assign cause to tragedy. The craving for justice when things felt random. The desire to look at grief and say, we did something. Your thoughts are interrupted by the quiet creak of the archive door. A clerk slips in, candle in hand, muttering about misfiled poultry trials. You nod politely and tuck away the last scroll. On your way out, you pass a wall of portraits, mayors, judges, priests, all staring forward with solemn painted expressions. You wonder how many of them ever doubted the system, or if doubting was even allowed. 3 barely awake jokes before your eyes slide shut. Superstition and justice walked into a courtroom. Only one brought a pig. That eclipse pig probably just wanted a moontan. If excommunication doesn't apply to bacon, does it still count? Pig punishments were public events. You're on your feet again, but this time, it's not in a courthouse. It's in a field, just outside the village wall, where the air smells like trampled grass, spilled cider, and anticipation. The crowd is gathering early women with baskets, children with sticky fingers, a man trying to balance 3 mugs of something vaguely alcoholic on a wooden tray. Welcome to medieval justice as public entertainment. There's a makeshift stage being set up. It's not elaborate, just some planks and rope, but someone's tied a banner above it, reading, "Justice be done." A little on the nose, but then again, so is everything here. You're told the execution is scheduled for noon. But of course, everyone shows up by sunrise. It's not every day a pig is put to death in public, wearing a ceremonial tunic and escorted by a procession of town officials and one slightly confused-looking priest. Yes, a procession, with music and bells. You blink, adjusting to the sunlight, and take in the full picture. The sow, the same one you've seen on trial this past week, is now standing beneath a scaffold. She's still in her linen robe, though someone's added a red sash for solemnity. The executioner, wearing a dark hood and a frown that says, "I didn't sign up for this," is checking the ropes like a man double-guessing every life decision that led to this moment. It's oddly quiet now. People are speaking in low tones, half reverent, half fascinated. A little boy whispers, "Is she going to cry?" And his mother shakes her head, eyes wide. You're beginning to realize this isn't just about punishment. This is theater. This is ritual. This is, well, community bonding in the strangest form imaginable. Historically, animal executions like this were surprisingly common in France and parts of the Holy Roman Empire. And they weren't done behind closed doors. They were designed to be seen, witnessed, absorbed. You might wonder why. It turns out public punishment wasn't just about deterring crime. It was about reaffirming collective values. When everyone watches justice unfold, even if the accused is oinking, it becomes a moment of social clarity. The law is real, order is restored, and no one, not even a pig, is above it. But let's be real. Some of this was also about spectacle. Vendors are here. You see a woman selling hot turnip mash. A man nearby offers sugared nuts wrapped in parchment. A bard is tuning his lute and softly humming something that might be called Ballad of the Wayward Swine. A group of teenagers, probably apprentices with the day off, are betting on how long the speech will last before the sentence is carried out. One of them swears he once saw a goat trial where the judge fainted from sunstroke. And the speeches do come. The mayor steps forward. He's wearing ceremonial robes and the heavy chain of office. He delivers a long, winding address about civic responsibility, divine order, and the importance of obedience even among livestock. No one listens, except you, and possibly the pig. Then comes the priest, who reads a brief prayer, not for the pig exactly, but for the town, for protection, for peace, for crops, as if by punishing this one sow, they might avoid another year of blight or sickness. You realize it's all connected in their minds, pig sin survival. The logic isn't modern, but it is deeply felt. There's still a question historians argue about. Were these public events primarily punitive or performative? Were they meant to enforce law or feed a deeper need for symbolism? Maybe both. Some records suggest that when these punishments were delayed, people became uneasy, as if justice left undone could invite misfortune, or perhaps worse, uncertainty. The moment comes. The executioner climbs the steps silent. The crowd holds its breath. And then quietly, it's over. Swift, almost anticlimactic. A few gasps, a few murmured prayers. Someone drops a wooden cup. And then remarkably, the crowd begins to disperse. Not in grief, but in relief. Conversations resume. The lute picks up again. The sugared nuts are suddenly very popular. You hear someone say, "Well, that's that. I suppose the baker will reopen tomorrow." You stay a little longer watching as the scaffold is taken down plank by plank. A group of teenagers starts arguing about which animal trial was the most memorable. One insists nothing beats the time a donkey kicked a bishop and got away with it. Another remembers a chicken who was acquitted with full honors. You turn and start walking back toward the village. The air is warm now, the scent of rosemary and roasted roots wafting from somewhere nearby. The event is already fading from memory, receding into the slow rhythm of medieval life. But somewhere, in a dusty ledger, someone is writing it all down. The pig's name, the date, the charges, the outcome. It will live forever in records and rumor, and in stories whispered at the hearth. 3 slow laughs before sleep catches you. Medieval executions come for the justice day, for the turnip mash. The pig wore a robe, the mayor wore a chain, and the executioner wore regret. At least one person came just for the sugared nuts and left profoundly confused. Monks as animal prosecutors. It's early evening, and you're sitting in the back of a monastery's side hall, where the stone walls echo with every whispered cough and sandal scuff. There's a distinct smell of beeswax candles, an old vellum like wisdom, and mildew had a baby. And sitting at the head of a long wooden table, is a Benedictine monk hunched over a sheaf of notes ready to prosecute. A duck. Yes, a duck. Not a metaphorical one. A literal, waddling, feathered, mildly aggressive duck that allegedly bit a friar's toe and disrupted a morning psalm. The accused is currently secured in a basket next to the bench. The monk brother Philip is both judge and prosecutor because apparently in this town, staffing is tight and monks are multitaskers. This isn't a play. It's a legitimate church-sanctioned trial. And you're realizing something strange monks were some of the most frequent legal representatives in animal cases. Why? Well, it turns out monks had the education. They could read, write, and cite doctrine. So when animals needed a voice or to be silenced, it was the monks who stepped up, possibly after morning prayers, possibly before supper. Brother Philippe clears his throat. The room quiets. He begins. This duck, he says, has displayed violent tendencies unbefitting its species and has acted with an impiety most foul. You blink. Did he mean to say foul or foul? Either way, it's probably the best line of the evening. He continues invoking St. Augustine natural order and something about divine hierarchy. You think he's arguing that ducks should by God's design be peaceful. This one is a heretic with feathers. Somewhere beside you, a novice giggles and is immediately elbowed by a senior monk. The duck lets out a loud quack, which echoes majestically off the vaulted ceiling. For a moment, it feels like the duck is trying to object. Now, let's pause and widen the view. In many parts of medieval Europe, especially France and Italy, church officials were deeply involved in the legal affairs of animals, particularly when the case touched on moral or theological concerns, anything that threatened the community's sense of divine order. A pig who ate a child. That was not just tragic, it was spiritual disorder. A rat infestation, possibly punishment for sin. A misbehaving duck. Well, it might be Tuesday. Monks, being literate and legally educated, were often tasked with representing the church in these cases. Sometimes they prosecuted. Sometimes they defended. Yes, there were monks who stood before a tribunal and argued passionately that a flock of locusts deserved mercy. And this wasn't satire. These arguments were written down, referenced, even quoted centuries later. Some of the most famous animal trials in history, like the case of the weevils excommunicated in 16th century France, feature brilliant theological reasoning from monks who clearly took their jobs very, very seriously. Back in the monastery hall, the trial continues. Brother Philippe calls his only witness a cook who swears under oath that the duck sprinted into the kitchen, pecked a holy loaf, and then charged at the friar's foot with unblinking hatred. The duck looks deeply unimpressed. Now the defense. A second monk, Brother Henry, stands. He's younger with the kind of soft voice that makes bread rise faster. He argues that the duck acted out of instinct, not malevolence. That animals, while created by God, do not possess moral agency. He quotes Thomas Aquinas. He references Job. He even suggests the duck might have been hungry and confused by the friar's sandals, which apparently resembled barley rolls. You want to applaud. But instead, you glance around to see how the others are reacting. Several monks are nodding. One is asleep. One is feeding the duck something that looks suspiciously like a fig. Finally, judgment is rendered. The duck is found guilty of disruption, but not blasphemy. It is sentenced to a week of exile from the monastery grounds to be kept in a pen behind the herb garden. The friar gets a new pair of shoes and possibly a tetanus salve. The monks stand bow and begin to disperse, like this was the most normal thing they'll do all month. And maybe it was. As you walk out into the evening air, you feel something gentle tugging at your brain. The logic of the trial may have been flawed, the theater absurd, but the emotions behind it strangely human. The desire to make sense of small chaos, to assign meaning to a bite, to organize the universe one duck at a time. 3 slow chuckles before lights out. The duck was sentenced to solitary confinement, but at least it got herbs. If Brother Philippe ever starts a podcast, you'd listen just for the poultry puns. Somewhere out there, a friar still doesn't trust any bird that waddles. The curious case of the cow lawyer. You find yourself in a drafty legal chamber in Lausanne, Switzerland. The year is 1474, and despite the cold, the room is packed. Not with dignitaries or nobles, though one might be lingering near the cheese plate, but with farmers' townsfolk and a startling number of people who have recently had close encounters with cows. You, of course, are here for the trial. Not of a cow, but for a cow. She's the defendant, and her lawyer just walked in. Now, medieval animal trials are strange enough, but this one stands out because it was meticulously recorded and later cited in legal discussions as precedent. Yes, legal precedent. For a cow. The room hushes as the animal is led in slow, steady, and probably confused. She's a tan-brown beauty with calm eyes and a surprisingly good posture. You notice someone tied a small ribbon to her horn. For dignity, presumably. This case is unusual. The cow is being tried for murder. A farmhand was found, trampled in the barn. Witnesses say the cow lunged suddenly. Others say the worker startled her. Either way, the town council blessed their legally ambitious hearts, decided a full trial was warranted, with legal representation for both sides. Enter the cow's lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Pierre de la Roche. He wears robes that are far too clean for a courtroom that shares space with livestock. He walks like he's in on the joke, but also ready to win. And he does something very peculiar. He opens with a defense not based on law, but on character. This cow, he says, gesturing gently with an open palm, has been in the service of this town's dairy needs for 3 seasons. She has never once shown aggression. She is known by name to several children. Someone in the crowd nods solemnly. You think you even hear a of agreement. Pierre then moves to a startling point, the concept of intent. Yes, you've heard this before in the pig trials, but now it's applied in full legal weight. Pierre argues that the cow did not intend harm, that the incident was an accident born of fright, not malice. That punishment without malice is unjust. You almost want to take notes. Meanwhile, the prosecution claims the cow acted with unnatural speed and that her hoof placement was suspicious. It's unclear whether the lawyer has ever actually met a cow. And here's where the oddest part comes in. Pierre wins. The cow is declared not guilty. Not because she's an animal and therefore not subject to human morality, though that's a good point, but because the court accepts the argument of self-defense. A cow. Cleared. On the basis of intent. The crowd cheers. Not wildly. This isn't a medieval concert, but with quiet approving nods and 1 or 2 raised tankards. And just like that, this cow becomes part of legal history. The verdict is written down, archived, and later referenced by lawyers and philosophers. Some call it progressive. Others call it absurd. Still others see it as a glimpse into how even in strange circumstances, justice systems grope toward fairness. You step outside, head spinning slightly. The sky is overcast, and the air smells like damp hay and roasted onions. The cow is being led away by her farmer, gently patting her side. "That's my girl," he mutters. You almost salute. This case became a point of debate for decades after. Could animals truly be responsible for harm? Should they have rights? Was intent possible, or were we just dressing up accidents with ritual? Some scholars point to this trial as evidence of early legal personhood being stretched too far. Others suggest it's not about the animal at all. It's about the human need to debate, to classify, to wrestle with causality. The cow didn't win a case. The idea of legal thought did. But here's the strangest detail you uncover later in a footnote scrawled in the margins of a law clerk's book. Pierre de la Roche went on to defend two more animals. In his career, a goat accused of blasphemy and a rooster suspected of witchcraft. He lost both. 3 sleepy chuckles before you tip over into dreams. Pierre's cow client still sends him hey thank you notes. The prosecutor later switched careers to bread law. Less hoof work. Your Honor, my client Moose in protest is now your favorite courtroom line. Tiny tribunals and village theaters. Tonight you're not in a grand hall or even a church-backed courtroom. You're in a cramped timber building that smells like garlic smoke and whatever the judge had for lunch. A tiny tribunal is convening, and the accused today is, of course, a pig, a small one, possibly still a juvenile, wearing what looks like an old apron turned sideways. There are 8 people in the room, 9 if you count the pig, 10 if you count the rat that just scurried under the bench. No one's alarmed. The rat's not on trial. Yet, you're in a village court, or as close to one, as it gets a room behind the alehouse where debts are settled, minor disputes aired, and occasionally livestock is tried for crimes against humanity. The presiding judge is also the town baker. His robes still smell like rye. His gavel is a soup ladle turned upside down. It feels more like theater than law. But then again, maybe it always did. The pig is accused of eating a bundle of medicinal herbs meant for the village midwife. Someone claims it was deliberate, which raises questions about whether pigs can distinguish between parsley and prenatal remedies. The midwife, arms folded and clearly not in the mood for forgiveness, argues that the beast knows what it did. You glance around. One wall leans slightly left. A spider is constructing a web between 2 legal scrolls. A rooster struts in, observes the room, and leaves without comment. The trial begins. A boy testifies that he saw the pig enter the apothecary garden with intention. When asked what that means, he replies, "She looked sneaky." The room murmurs. That sounds serious. Then comes a farmer speaking for the defense. He insists the pig is merely curious, not criminal. He offers to recite a poem in her honor. The judge declines. Barely. This whole proceeding lasts just under an hour, but feels like a dress rehearsal for a morality play written by someone who's never actually met a pig. The arguments are absurd, the evidence flimsy, the atmosphere deeply invested. And here's where you pause right at the edge of laughter and fascination, because this isn't an isolated incident. Throughout the Middle Ages, local trials of animals were often folded into village life. They weren't formal court procedures with regal pomp. They were events, theatrical, communal, a blend of law, ritual gossip, and catharsis. A way for small societies to deal with accidents, anger, and the inexplicable with structure and symbolism. When a pig ruins your crop, or a goat eats the church linen, you could rage. Or you could stage a trial. Let everyone play a part. Redirect chaos into a story. It's both incredibly human and strangely soothing. Some historians argue that these trials functioned as a form of community therapy. A pig becomes the embodiment of misfortune. The trial a scripted attempt at making sense of randomness. Punishment becomes less important than participation. Everyone gets to say their piece. Everyone gets to laugh or cry or complain about the soup. And always someone keeps a record. Back in your tiny tribunal, the judge delivers his verdict, guilty, but not malicious. The pig is sentenced to 1 week of tethered grazing and must wear a bell as a mark of her crime. The pig who has already fallen asleep does not object. The townspeople applaud, not wildly, not mockingly, but gently, like closing night of a play that went surprisingly well. As the pig is led out half-wrapped in a wool blanket, now the judge removes his soup ladle, declares the court adjourned, and announces that bread will be half price until sundown. You step outside. The sun's warm, and the village hums with small joys. Behind you, someone is already sketching a cartoon of the pig on a wall. It's not great art, but the ears are recognizable. 3 barely whispered giggles before your mind wanders off. This tribunal was sponsored by Justice and Garlic Serving Fairness and Soup since 1372. The spider on the scrolls is drafting a more coherent legal argument than the prosecution. A pig in a blanket is now both a snack and a defendant. The Town Crier's Pig Bulletin. You're lingering near a tavern door cup of warm cider in hand when the familiar voice of the town crier cuts through the misty afternoon like a rooster that majored in drama. He stands at the center of the square in full regalia hat, with a feather bell in hand and lungs apparently blessed by Saint Choudelot himself. Hear ye, he bellows. Let it be known that the sow of the Cooper's Lane shall stand trial on Wednesday next, accused of unruly conduct, improper rooting, and the theft of 2 turnips. You take a slow sip, and so it begins. Medieval justice didn't rely on newspapers, posters, or tweets. It relied on him, the town crier. Walking, yelling gossip and law rolled into one. And when animals were on trial, it was his job to make sure the entire village and sometimes the neighboring ones knew about it. And people came, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because, let's be honest, nothing breaks up a week of plowing and pottage quite like a pig being formally accused of larceny. This particular crier, Bernard, is the best in the district. He's got flair, emphasis, and a personal vendetta against the shoemaker's geese, who once chased him into a nettle bush during a proclamation. Since then, he's announced every poultry-related trial, with just a hint of passive aggression. But today's about a pig, and Bernard is in full performance mode. He rings his bell, again, clang, clang, and begins the full announcement. The Honorable Court of Saint Lucien shall convene for the trial of 1 female swine weight, approximately 16 stone, last seen disturbing the herb garden of Widow Marchand. All parties are invited to attend. Bring witness. bring bread. Someone cheers. Someone else mutters, "She's a repeat offender, that one." A child runs off to tell his siblings. A goat bleats dramatically. You can't make this up. And the details, they're not just shouted in the square. They're logged. Bernard hands a copy of his announcement to the local scribe, who stores it in a big leather ledger labeled "Events of Great Importance." Somewhere between a barn fire and an unseasonal hailstorm, there will now be a pig trial. Officially recognized. Canonical. Possibly immortal. Why all the fuss? Because trials, especially of animals, were community events. They weren't just about crime. They were social punctuation marks. A way to gather, to judge, to gossip, to affirm that yes, you all still existed in the same weird turnip-scented society. Public announcements gave people a script to follow. They added rhythm to village life. Without them, the world felt chaotic. With them, even the absurd could be organized. Even pig crimes could be calendar entries. Academic debates about this abound. Some historians see these proclamations as early media-curated information delivered with narrative flair. Others view them as civic rituals, more performance than journalism, but deeply influential all the same. Bernard's words are more than information. They're an invitation to participate in public memory, and he knows it. As he wraps up the day's news, one escaped cow, a missing shipment of salted herring, and a reminder that the mayor's daughter is still single, you can see him straighten, smile faintly, and let the bell dangle in his gloved hand like a mic drop. People disperse slowly. A woman starts humming. Two boys begin acting out a pig trial with sticks and questionable Latin. The baker mutters something about preheating the oven just in case. You sip the last of your cider and head toward the stables, where you're fairly certain the accused sow is currently eating hay like none of this applies to her. And maybe it doesn't. Not really. Maybe the bell, the shout, the date, it's all for us. To remind us that life is both serious and ridiculous. That justice can wear a robe and smell faintly of turnips. That even pigs deserve a proper headline. 3 slow chuckles as the night draws in. The town crier's real dream, becoming the first bard to write pig-based operas. Bring witness, bring bread is now your new party invitation format. Honestly, the sow would have confessed earlier, but she was chewing. Squealing on the stand, you're seated in what passes for the witness box, though in truth, it's just a chair with 3 uneven legs and a cushion that smells like damp wool and roasted onion. Today's proceedings are about to start, and you have the oddest view in the room. Directly across from you, on a slightly raised wooden platform, is a pig. Again, but this one is different. She's not dressed up. No ceremonial apron, no dignity-enhancing ribbon. Just a thick collar and a large presence. Her ears flick in time with the judge's sighs. And the moment the room settles, she does the most unexpected thing imaginable. She squeals. Loudly, at length, with drama. The sound bounces off the walls like a trumpet blast from some porcine war god. People duck. Someone spills their ink. The prosecutor drops his scroll. And for a heartbeat, you could swear the bailiff looks ready to flee. You somehow stay put. This, friends, is what some chroniclers have called the infamous testimonial interruption. And while it might sound like a bad joke from a courtroom comedy, it's a real event recorded in the dusty legal annals of 15th century France. The pig facing accusations of knocking over a market stall and allegedly consuming 2 bundles of dried cod and possibly 1 wooden shoe, interrupted her own trial. Repeatedly and loudly, some say it was a simple outburst. Others claim it was the animal's attempt at self-defense. A few theological scholars even wondered quietly in the safety of monasteries if perhaps this was evidence of possession. What's certain is that the squealing had an effect. One witness recanted their testimony, another fainted. A third, an elderly man who had a mild allergy to noise, declared the pig to be clearly a demon and left the room clutching his hat and dignity. Now here's where it gets curious. The records show that the judge, already sleep-deprived and possibly regretting his life choices, ordered a pause. The trial was adjourned. The pig was taken outside to reflect, and later, when the hearing resumed, the prosecution's case crumbled. No verdict was reached. The pig, in legal terms, got away with it. So you might be wondering, did pigs really squeal strategically? Unlikely. But did their outbursts affect the psychological tenor of a trial? Absolutely. In fact, across Europe, there are a handful of references to animals disrupting their own proceedings. A goat once broke free mid-sentencing and head-butted a wall so hard the judge dropped his gavel. A donkey once refused to enter the courtroom, causing the entire tribunal to move to the street. And then there's the pig you're watching now, standing squarely snorting judgment into the very bones of this courthouse. Some historians speculate these moments cause brief but meaningful rifts in belief. Imagine being a medieval villager who's been told that pigs are soulless vessels of instinct, and then watching one appear to respond to accusations with timing and flair. That kind of thing can rattle your world. Others argue it simply reinforced the absurdity of animal trials, that no matter how formal the robes or well-drawn the scrolls, the whole thing could be upended by one snort. Back in the courtroom, the clerk is trying to regain order. He's wiping ink from his sleeve. The judge demands silence. The pig blinks innocently and licks the wooden railing. The crowd is torn between reverence and laughter. You're somewhere in between, because what you've come to understand is this animal trials weren't always about justice. Sometimes they were about how humans responded when reality wobbled. When a pig squealed just as your arguments got shaky. When a rooster crowed during a closing statement. When law met unpredictability and lost. And in a world full of famine, plague, and fire, maybe the courtroom was the one place you could pretend to be in control. Until, of course, the defendant knocked over the bench and ate your hat. As the trial ends and the pig is led away, no verdict rendered, no sentence passed, you find yourself oddly impressed, because while many animals were condemned, this one just performed. 3 quiet giggles to carry into sleep. The pig's squeal was later translated into 5 languages and still made more sense than the prosecution. Somewhere in pig folklore, she's a legend, the one who talked back. Her defense strategy, chaos volume, and plausible confusion. Children as witnesses against pigs. You're sitting on a low bench in a village hall that smells like damp wood and overly ambitious cabbage stew. Today's case is already unusual, and that's saying something for medieval animal court, because this time the star witnesses are children, 3 of them to be precise. The first is a boy of about 7, standing on a stool because he's too short to see over the rail. He's wearing a tunic that's 1 size too big and sandals that flap when he shifts his weight. He points dramatically at the pig in question and declares, "It looked at me funny." This is the foundation of the prosecution's case. You raise an eyebrow. The pig, a portly creature with very average facial expressions, looks equally unimpressed. She snorts once softly, as if to say, "Really?" The second witness, a girl perhaps 9, claims that the pig came running from the left, which she describes as the bad side. The judge squints. The clerk writes that down anyway. The third child, slightly older, offers a more detailed account, complete with mimed reenactment of how the pig chased a chicken, then turned around, stared into the well, and muttered. The courtroom pauses. Did the pig mutter? Silence falls, followed by one awkward cough, and the unmistakable sound of a law student rapidly crossing something out in his notes. This might sound ridiculous, and it is, but it also reveals something surprisingly deep about the way these trials operated. In many documented cases, testimony from children was not only permitted, but central to the case. Why? Because children were considered honest, incorruptible, closer to innocence, and in some theological logic, therefore closer to truth. Of course, they were also imaginative, excitable, and often just eager to be involved in something that broke up the monotony of turnip school. And medieval life didn't come with child psychology manuals. There was no standardized method of cross-examination. No one asked about dream spheres, or whether the child was still mad the pig ate her lunch 2 weeks ago. In some towns, children were even coached before testifying. Tell the truth, and speak loudly, a mother might say. Unless it's about the goat, then keep quiet. Not suspicious at all. Back in the room, the judge clears his throat and asks the children to sit. The pig is then offered the opportunity to respond. This is mostly symbolic. The pig responds by sneezing, which draws gasps from half the room, and a blessed chuckle from the baker's apprentice. The defense lawyer, a weary man who has clearly tried to reason with pigs, before rises and gently questions the children. "Are you sure it was this pig?" he asks. "Not the one with the bent ear." The boy looks momentarily uncertain. The girl crosses her arms. The older one says, "It smelled the same." You take a deep breath. The pig, still calmly chewing something unidentifiable, looks increasingly like the sanest soul in the room. The judge finally makes his ruling. The testimony is deemed credible, but youthful. The pig is not exonerated, but the sentence is reduced from hanging to confinement in the tanner's paddock for 1 month. The crowd murmurs. Someone claps. The pig blinks slowly, as if contemplating a personal essay on the unreliability of tiny humans. This case raises an ongoing academic debate. Were animal trials a reflection of communal justice, or a community's desire to perform justice in a way that validated their fears and folklore? When children are your witnesses, is it because they speak truth, or because they tell the best stories? Some historians argue these trials blurred fact and narrative in deliberate ways. That stories were chosen over logic because they helped shape a village's identity. And that pigs, poor pigs, were just convenient villains in those tales. Others suggest more pragmatic motives. Child witnesses were easy to manipulate, and blaming a pig was often easier than blaming an adult, especially if that adult happened to be powerful. Or the mayor's nephew. You wander out of the hall as the crowd disperses. The children are playing tag, now shrieking and laughing, their solemn testimonies forgotten like a game already played. The pig is led away toward her new temporary paddock. As she passes, her eyes flick sideways for just a second. Was that amusement? Probably not. But tonight you'll pretend it was. 3 bedtime chuckles before dreams arrive. Muttered at the well is now the pig's official nickname. The defense attorney's greatest enemy, preschool hearsay. Honestly, the pig handled that cross-examination better than most nobles. When littermates were accomplices, this evening you've wandered into a town square where something's clearly up. People are gathered not for market, not for music, but for a trial with an unusual twist. Not 1 pig, but 4. A mother sow and her 3 piglets, all in court, all on trial, all very unaware of the gravity of the situation. The case, as explained by the very animated town crier, involves an unfortunate incident at the mill. A young child was found injured near the grain chute, and witnesses claimed the sow was rooting too aggressively. No one saw the moment of injury, of course, but the pigs were nearby. That's all it took. And so now, in what must be one of the strangest scenes in legal history, a mother pig stands accused of bodily harm, and her piglets are charged as accomplices by association. Yes, accomplices. You glance around for confirmation that this isn't some elaborate prank, but no, everyone here takes it seriously. A pig crime family right in the middle of town. The judge reads the charges, his voice echoing off the surrounding stone. The piglets, small, pink, and far more interested in chewing on the decorative railing, do not appear to grasp their legal jeopardy. One of them sneezes, which seems to deeply offend a man in the front row. Now here's the fascinating part: this case, while bizarre, is not unique. In medieval Europe, particularly in France and Switzerland, it was not uncommon for entire groups of animals to be tried together if they were believed to have acted in concert. Family groups of pigs, herds of goats, even swarms of insects. If one was guilty, the rest might be implicated by proximity. The logic simple and deeply flawed. If guilt could spread through sin, why not through blood? And if the mother pig was aggressive, surely she passed that aggression on to her offspring. Never mind that the piglets were at most 2 weeks old. Never mind that one was clearly asleep for most of the incident. The prosecution builds its case with fervor. The sow, they argue, should have restrained her young. As the matron of the litter, she bears moral responsibility. The piglets are charged with failing to retreat from the scene of mischief. That is an actual phrase used in the court record. The defense, meanwhile, is exhausted. Etienne, the same long-suffering lawyer you've come to admire, tries to inject reason. They're babies, he says, holding up a piglet like a very confused loaf of bread. They've been alive for less time than it takes to make a proper wheel of cheese. No one laughs. Well, you do. Quietly, Etienne continues arguing that guilt by association is not justice, but fear dressed up in formality. That animals, especially the very young, cannot be expected to understand danger, let alone law. He ends with a line so poetic it might have been lifted from a church sermon: "Let us not extend punishment beyond comprehension." The judge pauses. The townsfolk shift, and for a moment you think reason might win. But no, the sow is declared guilty and sentenced to death. The piglets, however, are spared on the condition they be relocated to a neighboring village and raised under supervision. You blink. The crowd nods. A strange compromise born more from discomfort than clarity. And here's where scholars still debate: was this about justice or just a way to calm fear? When something terrible happened, especially to a child, the community needed resolution. Blaming a single animal might feel incomplete. But blame a group, you get a sense of control. It also speaks to a larger medieval anxiety that sin was contagious. That badness could live in the blood, in families in proximity. And so justice followed that logic, as flawed and anthropomorphic as it was. You watch as the piglets are led away in a small cart. One of them snorts with what could be annoyance or hunger, or just a general protest against cart travel. The mother is taken in the opposite direction, and you notice FTN lingering behind, shaking his head like a man who just lost an argument with the universe. Later, you pass a group of villagers retelling the story, already adjusting details for dramatic effect. One claims the piglets cried. Another insists the sow bowed her head in shame. Neither is true, but you say nothing. Let the story evolve. That's what they always do. And as you drift toward sleep, you can't help but wonder if guilt can pass through proximity. Does that mean justice can too? 3 soft chuckles as your eyes grow heavy. One piglet tried to object, but was overruled for chewing the minutes. Etienne now adds defender of entire swine families to his resume. The relocated piglets are reportedly writing a memoir, Born Guilty, a tale of trotters and trials, of oaths and oinks. You're standing in a sun-dappled courtyard beside a crumbling town chapel, watching a very serious man hold out a crucifix toward a very indifferent pig. His robes are pristine, his hands steady, his Latin carefully pronounced. The pig, on the other hand, is licking a mossy rock and completely ignoring the sacred object inches from her snout. This somehow is part of the trial. The ritual you're witnessing is something recorded in more than one dusty tome of medieval jurisprudence, an animal being offered the chance to swear an oath. Yes, an oath, not just a symbolic act. A genuine legal attempt to bind a creature incapable of language theology or social contract to a sacred promise. You're watching someone try to make a pig swear before God. The theory, if you can call it that, was simple. If humans must swear to tell the truth and face divine punishment for lying, then animals accused of crimes should also be brought before the divine. A kind of celestial equality, or maybe just a desperate search for order in a chaotic world. Either way, it involved extended ceremonies that could include holy water incantations, and in one very odd case, an attempt to teach the animal to nod as a form of consent. It didn't go well. The animal sneezed instead, and the bishop panicked. The pig beside you, thankfully, is not sneezing. She's just stubbornly disengaged. The townspeople, however, are engaged. You hear murmurs behind you. Someone is whispering. If she doesn't look at the cross, that's a sign. A woman clutches a string of beads. A child points and says, "She looks guilty. Look at her ears." The ears are perfectly normal. The monk in charge of the ritual, Brother Allard, finishes his prayer. He pauses, holds out the cross again, and intones, "If the accused be innocent, may she not recoil. If she is guilty, may the Lord turn her gaze away." The pig walks forward, straight into a low bench, then pivots, then plops down in a sunny patch of grass with what can only be described as pure contentment. The crowd gasps. Brother Allard coughs. You stifle a chuckle. Now here's the academic question. Did people really believe this? Some certainly did. The Middle Ages were steeped in the idea that everything had moral weight, even nature. The sun rose because God willed it. Rain fell on the wicked and the just alike. Animals could carry omens, be messengers, or fall under temptation. So it wasn't such a stretch to imagine them making pacts, breaking them, and facing judgment. Other scholars suggest these oaths were never truly about belief, but rather about narrative closure. You've seen chaos. A pig attacked someone. Now what you need meaning. Justice. A sign that the universe still makes sense. So the oath becomes a formality, a performance that says, we did everything we could, even asked God directly. And sometimes, things got weirder. There's one record of a rooster being placed on a lectern and asked to confess. Another of a mule being offered confession by a priest with a line of questioning that included, did you carry sin, or were you made to do so? The mule sneezed. Again, panic ensued. You sit on the edge of a water trough, sunlight warming your back, listening as the judge declares the oath was incomplete. The beast did not reject the sign. Therefore, guilt is unproven. The pig is acquitted. Sort of. She'll be released under supervision, watched by the village that just watched her fail to swear an oath. As the pig is led away, still chewing that same piece of moss, the crowd begins to murmur again. Some say she's blessed. Others think she tricked the ritual. A few are disappointed there won't be an execution. One elderly man just wants his bench back. You trail behind as the pig is walked toward a small pasture. She looks neither relieved nor vindicated, just hungry. You can't help but reflect in a society so obsessed with signs and symbols, even silence has meaning. The pig didn't nod, didn't kneel, didn't bolt, and so her lack of response became the response. An anti-oath, a non-denial denial. Very modern, really. You pause beside the chapel door and glance back at Brother Allard. He's still holding the crucifix, now facing the other way, possibly hoping no one saw what just happened. He mutters something into his sleeve. Probably a prayer. Possibly a resignation letter. 3 final grins before dreams take over. The pig's legal strategy: say nothing, swear nothing, nap frequently. Brother Allard is reportedly reassigning himself to non-porcine ministry, the official verdict innocent, by way of napping. Punishment by hanging, not baconing. The morning is gray, the kind that softens every sound and makes even gossip seem polite. You're standing in a clearing just beyond the village walls, beside a wooden scaffold that looks far too official for the task at hand. Today, justice is not just being served, it's being elevated, because the pig in question is not being butchered. She's being hanged. Yes, hanged. With a rope, like a criminal. And no, you're not dreaming, though you might be drifting toward that liminal place between disbelief and sleep, where everything feels equally strange and plausible. Now, to be clear, this pig could have fed a family for a week. 2 even. But the villagers won't touch her. Not her ribs, not her fat, not even her trotters. Because in the eyes of the law, she's no longer food. She's a criminal. And criminals, at least the guilty ones, are unclean. That's not just superstition, it's policy. Throughout medieval Europe, when an animal was found guilty of a moral or legal offense, its body was considered tainted. To eat it would be to consume sin. Worse, it might invite spiritual consequences, illness, infertility, bad crops, or heaven forbid, a second pig uprising. So, what did they do? They executed the pig, usually by hanging. Not as a culinary process, as a punishment. Symbolic, public, complete, with clergy witnesses and sometimes unsettlingly poetic speeches. You shift your weight as the judge now, in his ceremonial black cloak, which, let's be honest, is mostly for dramatic effect, recites the sentence. For the crime of bloodshed against the laws of man and nature, let this beast be removed from the earth in sight of all. The pig is led forward, rope already secured. She snorts once, bored, not panicked, and nudges the executioner's shin, possibly hoping for a snack. The crowd murmurs. Some clutch their cloaks. A child starts crying. Someone hands him a honey biscuit. Justice is exhausting. Now here's where the academic conversation takes a turn. Some scholars argue that hanging pigs served a larger narrative purpose. It elevated the trial from legal quirk to moral lesson. Pigs weren't just punished, they were displayed. Their death was meant to remind the community that justice was blind absolute, and at least in theory equal. But others disagree. They see this not as law, but performance, a kind of medieval theater of control. You don't hang the pig because she understands guilt. You hang her so that everyone watching feels safe again. So they go home thinking, someone paid the price. The scales are balanced. We're okay now. And sometimes, the line between punishment and purification blurred even more. In rare cases, the rope was blessed, the scaffold sprinkled with holy water. One trial record from Burgundy even mentions a pig's last rites, though it's unclear whether the priest was fully sober. Still, the implication was clear. This was no slaughterhouse. It was a stage, with liturgy and drama. Back in the clearing, the execution proceeds. It's quick, clinical, and oddly quiet. No applause, no booing. Just an exhale shared by everyone. Like they've been holding something in for days and finally let it go. The body will be buried. Not burned. Not processed. A small grave will be dug at the edge of the forest. A marker placed, not for remembrance, but to ensure no one accidentally digs it up later and ends up cursed. You walk slowly through the dispersing crowd, noting the silence. No one's eager to talk. Even the gossipers are hushed. It's not fear. It's fatigue. Medieval justice wasn't just heavy in meaning. It was heavy in effort. Witnesses, judges, rituals, rope, and it never felt completely done. You pause at a nearby cart where the baker is offering yesterday's bread at half price. Wasn't much of a show, someone mutters. I've seen chickens with more flair. You say nothing. But later that night, as you sit by the fire and sip something warm from a chipped wooden cup, you replay the whole scene. The scaffold, the silence, the tension in the crowd, and most of all, the strangeness of treating an animal as something more than animal, then less than animal, then gone. Maybe the pig didn't understand the sentence, but the people did. And that was enough to keep the world spinning, at least until the next trial. 3 tired smiles before you drift. The pig didn't ask for a lawyer, but she did get a rope with extra knots. Somewhere, a butcher is quietly weeping over all that wasted bacon. The real crime, wasting perfectly good lard in the name of morality. The role of church bells in sentencing. You're awake, but barely. Somewhere between memory and dream, you find yourself near a tall bell tower on the edge of a village square, just as the sun begins its long slide behind the rooftops. The stone is cool beneath your fingertips, and the bell overhead sways gently in the breeze like a sleeping sentinel waiting for its cue. Then clang, a single solemn toll. No one speaks. No one moves. And even the livestock pause like they too know something sacred or judicial is unfolding. This isn't a mass, it's a sentence. A pig has just been condemned, and the church bell is announcing it. Strange, right? But this was tradition in many parts of medieval Europe. When justice was pronounced, the bell rang. Not just for people, but for animals too. A final moment of solemnity. An audible marker that something or someone had been found guilty in the eyes of law and heaven. You glance around the square. A few townsfolk cross themselves. One elderly man removes his hat. A woman clutches a rosary. And above it all, that heavy ancient bell continues its slow rhythm toll. Pause. Toll. Pause. This isn't random. There's meaning in the number of rings, their spacing, their volume. 1 toll for judgment, 3 for death. A longer chime for particularly sinful crimes, yes, even for pigs. You follow the sound toward the church. Its doors are open, and a few figures move slowly inside. Monk scribes, maybe a few curious children trying to sneak in behind the cassock of the deacon. The line between justice and faith is thinner here than the parchment they scribble on. And here's where it gets truly curious. Some villages believed that the bell didn't just announce justice, it sealed it. That until the bell rang, the sentence wasn't spiritually binding. The verdict hung in limbo, waiting to be acknowledged by something higher. The bell was the gavel of heaven. Scholars still debate whether this was more symbolic than literal, but records show that trials, both human and animal, often paused to wait for the church bell to ring, even if the tower was miles away. Entire processions would delay their return to town until the bell had confirmed that justice had been witnessed by God. And if the bell didn't ring, oof, that was bad. That meant divine disapproval, or worse, unfinished business. One story tells of a pig sentence being overturned after the rope on the bell snapped mid-toll. The judge took it as a sign. The pig lived. The rope was replaced. The story never died. Back in your village, the tolling ends. People begin to murmur again, relief softening their expressions. The ritual has been completed. The law, both earthly and celestial, has been satisfied. You overhear a blacksmith tell his apprentice, "It's done now. We can eat in peace." You find that phrase both comforting and absurd, but also very human. Because this is the heart of it, isn't it? These bells weren't just for ceremony. They were a shared language of certainty in an uncertain world. When things felt chaotic, plague, famine, pigs in court, you needed something solid, something loud and echoing and slightly out of tune, something to say, yes, this really happened. Yes, it matters. Yes, we heard it too. You walk slowly toward the edge of the village, past windows glowing with candlelight. Somewhere, a child is being told the story of today's verdict, how the pig was found guilty, how the bell rang, how peace returned. And tomorrow maybe nothing strange will happen. Maybe no animal will be charged with sacrilege. Maybe no goat will chew the parish records. Maybe. But if it does, the bell will be ready. And so will you. 3 gentle giggles to carry to sleep. The pig didn't understand the bell, but she probably appreciated the dramatic timing. The village choir once tried to harmonize with the toll. It didn't end well. If your trial ends with a bell solo, you either made history or very poor dietary choices. Medieval moral panic with tusks. You wake up to tension. Not the sword-fighting, dragon-sighting kind, just the low buzzing anxiety of a town that's convinced its pigs have become a problem. Not one pig, not one trial, just pigs plural. Being too many, too bold, too piggish. You step into the town square, where the local magistrate is holding a scroll so long it trails slightly in the mud. He's reading aloud ordinances, some old, some clearly made up 10 minutes ago, all concerning the regulation of swine. Pigs may not roam after sunset. Pigs must be leashed. Pigs must wear bells. Pigs are not allowed within 10 paces of a bread stall. The mood is uneasy. A woman leans over and whispers, "Did you hear about the one that knocked over a baptismal font?" Another shakes her head. 2 pigs were seen staring at the bishop's house, unblinking. This, dear listener, is a medieval moral panic, and the target of this mass anxiety, not witches, not foreigners, not even cats this time. No, it's pigs. The town has declared an emergency. Meetings are being held. Walls are being built. There are even hand-drawn warning signs featuring pigs in crude little cloaks looking vaguely conspiratorial. Now let's be clear, medieval towns were no strangers to fear. Plague, famine, wolves, and unpaid taxes could ruin your month. But sometimes the fear took stranger forms. Collective anxiety, when given time to ferment, didn't need a logical outlet. It just needed a target. And pigs were perfect. They were everywhere, loose in the streets, rooting in gardens, sometimes stealing unattended snacks. They were intelligent, unpredictable, and worst of all, familiar. When things went wrong, when the mill caught fire, or the grain spoiled, it was easy to mutter, "It was the pigs." And then if someone else agreed, that's all it took. The laws got stricter. The stories got weirder. Someone claimed to see a pig reading a parchment. Another swore a group of swine formed a circle around the shrine and hummed. Did it happen? No one knows. But enough people said it did. And suddenly the town was on edge. You watch as a carpenter boards up the side of his shed in case of pig incursion. A priest nervously sprinkles holy water on the well. A child points to a perfectly innocent pig and screams, "That's the one I saw in my dream." It would be funny if it weren't so familiar, because this is more than just overreaction. It's about control. The pigs became a symbol, not just of mess or danger, but of things slipping out of control. And when people feel powerless, they look for something to push back against, even if it squeals. Historians still debate these episodes. Some call them proto-hysteria. Others call them performative politics, mayors and clergy using animal regulation to look decisive. Still others suggest it was simply boredom laced with fear. A kind of social theater where pigs accidentally got the lead role. And sure, not every town had a full-blown panic, but many had rules, edicts, restrictions on where pigs could walk, eat, or nap. One town even had an official pig warden whose job was to patrol alleyways and issue warnings for suspicious snuffling. You wonder what that job paid. As evening falls, you return to the square and find the magistrate still talking, still rewriting swine ordinances as he goes. No pig may wear red. Why red? No pig may climb stairs without cause. What constitutes cause? The townsfolk are nodding, agreeing. Finally, someone is doing something, but nearby, you see a pig, small, muddy, expressionless, watching from behind a fence. She's not causing trouble. She's chewing on a stick, and something about the calm in her gaze reminds you of a deeper truth. Fear doesn't always need a reason, just an excuse. You walk away quietly, leaving the panic behind you like a fog lifting from the fields. 3 weary grins before your eyes close. The pig warden quit after a goose impersonated a swine and got him reassigned. Suspicious Snuffling is now your new band name. The pigs held a meeting about all this once. They mostly just napped. Swine rights and wrongdoings. You find yourself seated on a bale of hay inside a dusty village hall, its rafters sagging slightly as if weighed down by too many declarations and not enough good decisions. Today's agenda: a heated debate. Yes, a real debate on the rights of pigs. You didn't think pigs had rights? Oh, friend, you've clearly never met a medieval jurist with too much ink and not enough real crime to prosecute. At the front of the room is a long table, and behind it a panel of local authorities, philosophers, one retired monk, and a man who introduces himself only as Gerard, the reasonably well-read. They've gathered to address a growing concern. Can pigs be truly guilty if they do not know the law? A fair question, really. One that sends half the village into a frenzy of opinions and the other half into a very polite nap. You lean forward. This is the most interesting thing since the cheese wheel rebellion of last spring. Gerard opens the proceedings with a compelling argument. To be guilty, one must have intent. A pig, though mischievous, does not possess men's the guilty mind. The blacksmith scoffs. What about when they look you in the eye before tipping over your apple barrel? Gerard counters. That's mischief, not malice. A farmer chimes in. I once saw a pig wait until I turned around before escaping. That's premeditation. The room erupts into mild, hay-dusted chaos, but underneath the jokes and the animated gesturing with tankards, there's a serious question, forming one that would echo for centuries in legal and philosophical circles. Is it possible to commit a crime without understanding it? In medieval law, the answer was a murky shrug, followed by the construction of a scaffold. But today's villagers, inspired perhaps by recent absurdities, are considering alternatives. Some suggest that pigs should be treated like children in the law, capable of action, but not of full understanding. Others insist they are tools of the devil, citing rooting at sacred relics as evidence. One young scribe timidly raises her hand and offers a different view. What if these trials aren't about the animals at all, but about us? What if we're using them to put our own behavior on trial? The room stills. For a moment, no one speaks. Then someone mutters, "That's a bit deep for a Tuesday," but you feel something shift. The laughter softens. The tone tilts toward reflection. Because she's right, isn't she? These trials weren't just about pigs. They were about boundaries, order. The eternal messy effort to project human morality onto a world that didn't always care. When we punished the pig, maybe we were punishing carelessness, lost grief. Maybe we were asking the world to make sense of something senseless. The idea sticks with you. You step outside as the debate continues, now branching into whether goats deserve legal defense. They do not, according to Gerard. The late afternoon light cuts through the alleyways, painting soft gold on the cobblestones. Somewhere nearby, a pig snuffles in the dirt, utterly oblivious to her rising legal relevance. Modern scholars, looking back at these moments, often divide into camps. Some see the pig trials as evidence of a legal system stretching too far, trying to be all-encompassing, too literal in its desire for moral neatness. Others view them as rituals of control, less about law, more about performance, shared narrative, and psychological comfort. But a few, just a few, wonder if perhaps unknowingly medieval people stumbled into early questions of justice that still linger today. What makes a being culpable? What is punishment for? And most of all, who gets to decide? As you stroll past the stables, you overhear a man saying, "Well, if pigs are people now, they'd better start paying rent." You smile. The conversation will continue. 3 quiet smirks for your thoughtful dreams. Gerard's next lecture, Free Will and Swine, a philosophical trot. The pigs are forming a union. The goats refuse to join on moral grounds. Someone tried to give a pig a jury of its peers. It didn't go well, mostly oinking. Other animals on trial: bees, locusts. The village square is oddly quiet today. Not somber, just confused. Because for once, the accused is not snorting or trotting or wearing a linen smock with attitude. No, today's defendant is more of a buzz than a presence. You're here for the bee trial. Yes, bees, not a hive metaphor, not a symbolic name for a band of outlaws. Actual fuzzy nectar-loving insects that have somehow collectively been summoned to court. You squint at the parchment posted near the church gate. Trial to be held against the bees of St. Roch Meadow for unlawful intrusion upon sacred space and the sting of Brother Julian. You don't know what's more remarkable, that they filed charges against insects, or that someone managed to identify which bees were responsible. This is not fiction. In multiple parts of medieval Europe, animals and insects, even microscopic nuisances, were subject to legal action, particularly when they disrupted daily life in ways that couldn't be ignored or understood. Bees were sued for stinging monks. Locusts were prosecuted for eating crops. Rats were excommunicated. Eels were once put on probation. Don't ask. The bee case today is proceeding under a unique arrangement. Since the bees couldn't be brought in physically, someone tried, but they escaped the court, will issue its ruling in absentia. The charges are read aloud in full. The prosecutor, a wiry man with ink stains and a personal grudge against buzzing things, claims the bees invaded monastic property, disrupted prayer, and inflicted bodily harm without cause. He insists they be banished from the meadow and ordered never to return. Someone whispers, "How will they know?" Someone else mutters, "They always know." Then comes the defense. A monk, gentle, clearly allergic, but brave nonetheless, rises to speak on behalf of the bees. He begins by praising their industry loyalty to the queen and devotion to floral diversity. The crowd snickers, but he continues. He argues that the sting was an accident, that the bees were provoked, that the true crime would be banishing creatures who provide wax for candles and honey for literally everything. And then, oh yes, he quotes scripture. "Consider the bees, O ye faithful," he says, or at least something close to it. People nod. They like scripture. It calms them. Still, the court debates. For an hour, possibly 2. You lose track because someone starts selling cider near the well, and you get distracted by a man carving a tiny gavel out of beetroot. Eventually, a verdict is reached. The bees are found guilty, but not malicious. The sentence: relocation. The monks are instructed to move the hives across the river to less sacred territory. Brother Julian is awarded a jar of honey for suffering and inconvenience. Justice. Now this might sound like a one-off, but trials like these were surprisingly common. Locusts in particular were frequently charged with mass destruction of property. Court records describe attempts to summon the insects with bells and even assign them legal counsel. In one Swiss case, the bishop asked the locusts to leave peacefully, giving them 3 days' notice. Spoiler, they did not leave. In some instances, the trials became elaborate ceremonies. Prayers, exorcisms, public readings of legal charges delivered into fields by clergy who truly believed, or at least who knew, that the people needed something to believe. Because that's the thread running through all of it, isn't it? These weren't just bugs. They were stand-ins for hunger, for disorder, for things humans couldn't control. Putting them on trial gave the illusion that we could negotiate with nature, that if we used the right words, wore the right robes, rang the right bells, the world might behave itself. You lean against the gate as the crowd drifts off, buzzing with its own opinions. The beehives are already being prepared for transport. A child asks if the bees will get mad about it. His mother just shrugs. Depends if they think they won. You watch the monk from earlier carefully remove a honeycomb and whisper something soft. You can't hear the words, but the bees don't sting him. Take that how you will. 3 sleepy stingers before your dreams swarm in. The bee lawyer was paid in honey, but stung with taxes. The locusts appealed, but the parchment got eaten. You haven't really lived until you've seen a priest yell legal Latin into a beehive. A pig on the run. It's just after dawn, when the baker's apprentice bursts into the town square. Flour still clinging to his sleeves, shouting the words no one ever expects to hear before breakfast. The pig has escaped. Heads turn. Loaves are dropped. A half-slept guard mutters something about not again. And you, dear listener, are somehow swept into the strangest manhunt since the great cabbage theft of '73. The pig in question, a sow scheduled for trial that very afternoon, charged with garden destruction theft of carrots and allegedly intimidating a parish goose. She was being held in a temporary pen behind the magistrate's office until apparently someone forgot to latch the gate, and now she's gone. But this isn't just a pig slipping into a nearby hedge. Oh no. This is a fugitive. The first real case of porcine evasion in local legal memory. Within the hour, the entire village is involved. Children are assigned to patrol alleyways. Apprentices are dispatched to nearby fields. The blacksmith volunteers his dog, who is more interested in the snacks than the scent trail. Someone starts ringing the church bell, just in case the sound might shame her into returning. You join the search party, headed toward the bakery district. That's where she was last seen, sauntering past the herb's tail, flicking completely unbothered. A witness swears she paused at the fountain, looked directly at him, and winked. Another says she stole a cinnamon bun. The baker denies this, but his face says otherwise. The chase lasts 3 full days. 3 days of false leads, whispered sightings, mysterious hoofprints. Someone accuses the miller of hiding her in exchange for truffle favors. Someone else claims the pig was spotted boarding a grain cart headed to the next province over. Rumors spiral. Was she blessed? Cursed an agent of pig justice? Meanwhile, the trial is postponed. The court clerk keeps rescheduling witness testimonies, and the defense attorney, Etienne of course, uses the time to draft a new motion. In absentia, oincus, non judicandus. One cannot judge what cannot be found, especially if it snorts. Eventually, it's the village baker. Yes, the very one she allegedly robbed, who finds her. He opens the back door one morning, And there she is, nestled in a warm corner of the storeroom, surrounded by spilled flour sacks and half a wheel of cheese. She's asleep, content, possibly smug. The villagers gather quickly. There's laughter relief and more than a little admiration. The pig is returned to custody, not forcibly, but lured gently with the remainder of the cheese wheel. Now here's where things get interesting. Despite her capture, the public mood has shifted. No longer is she the defendant. She's a legend, a story, a pig with initiative. One woman says she just wanted better food. Another mutters, honestly, I would have run too. At her rescheduled trial, the atmosphere is festive. The judge reads the charges with a straight face, but you can tell he's suppressing a grin. The prosecutor clearly exhausted presence, only 2 witnesses. One of them simply says she looked free. FTN naturally petitions for leniency based on the pig's active resistance to unjust confinement. He even calls her a model of rural resilience. Amazingly, it works. The sentence is reduced. No execution, no exile. Instead, the pig is to be relocated to the monastery farm under supervised probation, with fresh bedding and presumably fewer temptations involving pastries. As she's led away, someone starts humming a tune. A bard begins composing lyrics. A child holds up a drawing labeled The Great Escape. And that's how a fugitive pig became a folk hero. Historians later refer to this as the Saint Olive Saut incident, citing it as a moment when public sentiment began to turn not just toward the absurdity of animal trials, but toward compassion, or at least storytelling. Because here's the truth. Sometimes a pig isn't just a pig. Sometimes she's a mirror of frustration, of wit, of rebellion, and sometimes of how much people want to believe in a little mischief with their justice. 3 wink-worthy laughs before sleep steals in. Wanted posters were printed, but the pig kept eating them. She's reportedly thriving on the monastery farm and giving the goats ideas. The last pig, execution on record. The wind is sharp today, curling through the narrow streets of a small provincial town like it's trying to erase the morning before it begins. You're standing at the edge of a modest square where only a few villagers have gathered. There's no crowd, no bell, no baker shouting about buns this time, just a wooden platform, a quiet judge, and one final pig. You've arrived at the last known execution of a pig in recorded European history. The year is somewhere in the early 1700s, and things feel different, quieter, grayer, more unsure. This isn't the bustling festival of medieval justice. You've grown familiar with no market carts, no children miming trials with sticks, no ceremonial robe for the sow, just a rope, a clerk with thin hands, and a deeply conflicted-looking constable who'd clearly rather be anywhere else. The charge is still the same violence against a human, a child again. And once again, the blame lands on the animal nearest the chaos. But even as the trial proceeds, you sense the tone has changed. The people watching aren't curious or celebratory. They're hesitant. You catch snippets of conversation. Do we still do this? Seems unnecessary. She's just a pig. The judge reads the charges without flourish. The prosecutor, older than he probably should be, stumbles on his lines. The defense attorney, young, barely out of school, clearly more used to contract disputes, tries to argue that the moral responsibility of animals is a fading concept in modern jurisprudence. It doesn't roll off the tongue, but the meaning is clear. Something has shifted. This moment marks the end of an era, a slow creaking, close to centuries of animal trials. From solemn rituals to dramatic public performances, the practice had spanned nearly 500 years. And now, this final case feels like everyone is going through the motions, unsure why they still are. So what happened? Legal scholars point to the rise of Enlightenment thinking, the shift toward reasoned science and human-centered law. As people began to question long-held beliefs about morality, punishment, and the soul, the idea of holding animals legally accountable began to unravel. Slowly, reluctantly, by the 18th century, judges started refusing to hear animal cases. Towns stopped writing them into the record. Philosophers like Descartes and Locke reshaped public understanding of animals not as sinful, willful creatures, but as instinct-driven beings, undeserving of blame or punishment. And so one by one, the trials stopped. But not before this one. The pig stands patiently tethered to a short post. She's calm. The verdict is predictable. Guilty. But even the judge hesitates. He looks out across the square, as if expecting some sign, a nod, a bell, an excuse to say no. None comes. The sentence is carried out, but with no ceremony, no sermon, no audience beyond a few cold onlookers, and one rooster pecking listlessly at a patch of dirt. The body is buried quietly. No marker, no song. You linger at the edge of the field, where it ends, watching a clerk pack away the ledger that contains what may be the final line in a very strange chapter of human history. What began centuries ago with solemn chants and symbolic robes has ended with silence and second thoughts. And maybe that's fitting, because this last trial isn't about drama, it's about reflection. A moment of uncomfortable honesty, a realization that we once projected law onto hooves and fear onto snouts, and then asked the sky to approve. You begin walking back toward the inn, where the fire is probably still going, and someone's overcooked stew is bubbling over. Behind you, the square empties completely. The judge removes his robe. The constable leans on his staff and sighs. The pig is gone. The ritual is over. And with it, a peculiar sort of justice has faded into memory. 3 quiet nods before you rest. The last pig went down in history quietly and possibly confused. The Enlightenment finally giving pigs the legal break they deserved. Somewhere, Etienne retires, wondering why he ever memorized pig law. When we projected ourselves onto pigs, you're sitting beneath a tree just outside the village walls. The kind of tree that looks like it's seen too much and would rather not talk about it. There's no trial today. No rope, no robe, no announcements. Just the hush of late evening, the smell of distant bread, and a few stray pigs nosing around in the grass for something, anything worth chewing. And you, for once, are not watching them as suspects. You're watching them as mirrors. Because here, at the end of all these strange, snorting stories, a question drifts into your mind like wood smoke. What were we really putting on trial all along? Was it pigs, or was it us? From the first oaths before God to the last hanging in silence, it was never really about justice for animals. It was about what humans needed, order answers, a sense that the world could be understood if only we followed the steps correctly: accuse, assess, punish, repeat. Pigs were perfect for this. They were everywhere. They lived close. They weren't terrifying like wolves or mysterious like cats. They were familiar. fallible, and therefore relatable. When a pig snapped or ran or stole or just looked a little too clever, we projected onto her the things we feared in ourselves: appetite, chaos, disobedience. The pig that stole bread was the peasant who dreamed of freedom. The pig that trampled a child was the randomness of loss. The pig that squealed in court, maybe she was saying what we couldn't. Every trial was a ritual not just of justice, but of symbolic cleansing. Punish the pig, and maybe you didn't have to blame the butcher, the parent, or the priest. Maybe guilt didn't have to be personal. Maybe you could bury it with hooves, and yet despite it all, despite centuries of robes, ropes, and rhetoric, none of it made the world any simpler. The crops still failed. The children still wandered. The plagues still came. No amount of parchment or ceremony could keep nature in line. And slowly, people began to realize perhaps the pigs weren't the problem. Perhaps the rules we built were reflections, not fences. Modern scholars look back and call it projection, a mix of moral, panic social theater, and legal experimentation. But you sitting under this tree, as the sky turns lavender, feel something gentler at play. Maybe these trials were a clumsy, well-meaning way of understanding our place in the world. A world where animals weren't just beasts. They were part of the same fragile, bewildering story. Where swine could be villains, yes, but also victims. Symbols, scapegoats, mirrors with curly tails. And now, as you listen to the quiet snuffling of a nearby piglet chasing a beetle with zero criminal intent, it's hard not to smile. She's just doing what pigs do: living, moving, ignoring the invisible lines we drew. You lie back in the grass, watching the stars blink into place. Somewhere far off, a dog barks, a shutter creaks, a pig grunts content and unapologetic. And maybe that's all we ever needed to understand. 3 final reflections, soft and slow. Maybe we didn't fear pigs. We feared what they reminded us of. History never judged them. We just talked louder. And through it all, the pigs just kept being pigs. A gentle whisper to close the night. So now, friend, as the last echoes of distant church bells fade, and the straw beneath your thoughts finally settles, let's leave the trials and squeals behind. The pigs are quiet. The judges have gone home. The scrolls are rolled up, and the rope has long since frayed. Tonight, you've walked centuries in soft leather shoes. You've sat beside monks, reading charges aloud to chickens. You've watched a sow outwit a village. You've seen humans try to make the world make sense, one hoofprint at a time. And maybe, just maybe, all those trials weren't really about guilt or law or even pigs. Maybe they were about us trying to tame a wild, unpredictable world with robes and rules. Maybe they were our way of saying, we're here. We see the chaos, and we still believe in order, even if we have to invent it. But that story's done now. You're safe. The night is deep and slow. Let your breath fall in rhythm with the silence. Let the world grow fuzzy at the edges like an old parchment softening in candlelight. Forget the squeals. Forget the verdicts. Forget even the questions. All that remains now is the stillness and a strange, tender comfort in knowing that even the oddest corners of history were filled with people simply doing their best, even when it involved a pig in a tunic. That's the story for tonight. May your dreams be filled with wonder and peace.